So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and allow Dr. Stockman to join us. And if there is any questions, perhaps
we've been getting some questions already, I'm glad to say, and I'm sure we'll have more. I see we now have 12 comments in the Q&A, and they're going up steadily, Shahrokh. It was long, but I think most people stayed through most of it. And I guess I'll ask you this question while we're going through all these questions. It's actually not a very good question in a way. As I listened to this, I kept thinking, how many times in this tablet does Baha'u'lláh allude to the fact that he is the promised one, that he's the return of Christ? But I think one would very quickly lose count. There's so many of them, so many references.
Yes, yes, there is many references. I think it's, it's unmistakable. It's you can't get any more clearer than that. I mean, he is making it very explicit that he is the return of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's one place he actually does say it directly, it seems to me, in the tablet.
Yes,
but
for sure.
There are a lot of the others, it's sort of hard to avoid that conclusion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dennis says, does anyone know if popes after Pius IX had received and made any comments about this tablet?
No, not that we know of. I mean, I think some friends have and scholars have suggested that one, if allowed, one could look at Vatican archives and see whether there's a copy there. According to Baha'u'lláh, these tablets were all sent, and there was a Catholic patriarch in Jerusalem at the time of Baha'u'lláh, and so somehow I have not investigated thoroughly how they would have, and there has not been any comments by any Baha'i scholars or even the beloved guardian or Abdul Baha that has come to light that has that has expressed how this particular tablet was transmitted to the Pope or to Rome. It would have been very difficult because of the particularly I would say right away, but the Pope lived another 8 years, I would say, till 1878. So when things would have kind of died down as far as the commotion and the fighting, it certainly would have been very difficult, I would imagine, to get this to the Pope or to Vatican, soon after its revelation. But it's I believe that it was sent because Baha'u'lláh says it was sent.
Yeah, presumably he could have sent it, through perhaps the French envoy in Istanbul or something like that. Perhaps something like that.
Well, I think politically, no. Well, yes, but he would have had to send it. He would have had to probably send it through the Syrian network, because by then Istanbul was too far away. It was, even though it's the Sublime Porte, but he would have, he had already given up doing that at the court because he chose, for example, to go through Camp de Gabonneau to transmit, because even though they had an ambassador at the Sublime Porte that he could have, but it seems that these letters were going to be censured. They would have been obstructed, so they would have it would have had to have been done in a very wise manner that So we will never know until it comes to light. It may take decades or even centuries till we actually come across some of these things. I mean, we're just finding out about Baha'u'llah's tablet to, Napoleon III. For the longest time, we didn't even know how he got out and how it was transmitted. But we now know that it was through Count de Gabinot that was sent to the king, Napoleon.
Interesting.
So yeah.
An anonymous contributor asks whether, alas, when we came once again, we beheld you fleeing from us. Does that refer to Muhammad? And there's also a reference to "ye cannot bear it now," which of course is from the Gospels.
No, this is we flee from us is basically there is a reference where he's addressing, if I recall correctly, he's addressing the divines, of all, and the followers of religions, and essentially fleeing, the one specific example is that some of that there's a tradition that says, in particular Shia Islam, that there is a word that the Qa'im, or the promised one, will utter that will set aflight all the religious doctors, and that basically they cannot sustain it, that they will be, and that is the word I, where Baha'u'llah says, I am the all glorious, I am. Whereas, in the previous religions, it's always God being addressed sort of in the third person, or in a more specific way, as this transcendent being, and not as a singular and also a personal I or me. Whereas Baha'u'llah, in his proclamation, and the Bab have declared themselves to be essentially the manifestations of God, and speaking the word of God, and being God, and this is where they were accused of, in Islam, of shirk, joining partners with God, which is a cardinal sin. And the same way, so this is, fleeing from us also is that, it could also mean that they are, they can't sustain this, and they just run away from it. They can't hear it. They cannot sit and observe it, and digest it, and act on it. They just basically ignore it or push it away, kind of thing. That's how I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Chris asks this question: in the various tablets, how many letters did Baha'u'llah write to the different countries and or governments?
Well, we know this is something that, we know this, there's general letters, the letter, as we know, the general letter to the kings and rulers is Surah Muluk. Then we have certain individual heads of states, the 3 Ottoman letters that were sent to 2 Ottoman prime ministers and foreign ministers. Then there are these individual kings and rulers that we have talked about. So altogether probably just under a dozen. But Baha'u'llah has addressed in general many, and in his other works, he addresses individuals, addresses groups, and that is numerous. Mm-hmm. But as far as specific letters, there's a handful.
Mm. Especially if you include the references in the Akdas that we'll be talking about.
Exactly.
It raises it even higher. But many.
Yeah.
I can count 10 right offhand. You got the Shah, the Sultan, 2 prime ministers, Ottoman prime ministers, and then the various 6 rulers that we're covering in these 2 series. Right there, that's 10.
There was
right
also the Persian, ambassador to Sublime Porte, Persian ambassador to Iraq. Yeah, it's a good, specifically, there's a good, I would say a dozen or more, direct and specific, but then they're also echoed in other of Baha'u'llah's works, or sections of them were also, yeah.
Eric says this: Pius IX solemnly defined the dogma of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the bull of Ineffabilis Deus. Hence, he has come to be known as the Pope of the Immaculate Conception. To your knowledge, are there perhaps any elements of the Lohe Pop that are pointing to this specific dogma?
Well, I think when we read the entire tablet, you tell me if some of that is being referred to. I think there are references in the Baha'u'llah's writings. There are other tablets that Bahá'u'lláh has revealed to other Christians or Christian groups, if you will, that have references to certain theological dogmas that are enshrined within the church. The whole concept of Immaculate Conception of Virgin Mary, again, in the Kitab-i-Iran, there is references to that. But again, not in the way that has been enunciated in the church. So there are references if you explore the writings. This tablet, I'll let you decide whether there is or there's not.
And Eric also asks, also the beloved guardian referred to the tablet to the Pope Pius IX as the, quote, most weighty epistle, and contrasted the outwardly polarized earthly conditions of its imprisoned author and the powerful ecclesiastical recipient in God Passes By. Could you elaborate further on this?
That we don't have time for me to elaborate on that, but it's certainly a good question. It's something that could be discussed in the forum, in the classes, if you're taking the class. At this time, I think I'll pass on that.
And another anonymous attendee asked, apologizing that he missed the beginning part of the class, whether we know whether the tablet to the Pope was ever translated from Arabic into Latin. He says by the Baha'is, but presumably there weren't very many Baha'is in the world at that time who knew Latin. You already mentioned the fact that we really don't know who delivered it or how the Pope would have received it. So,
yeah, there's no, for example, with the tablet to Napoleon, the second tablet, we know that even though it was originally in Arabic, it was translated by an individual and into French, and then was sent. So there could be certainly that it's possible. Again, I don't have anything specific that I can share with you. There's still a lot more research that needs to be done. A lot of this stuff you have to get into original archival materials to see whether how you can link all of this together. But you definitely we have to look at the sort of the historical circumstances and who was there and how it was there. When we study history, we have to really look at the context, of what was happening at the time. And I think this is what I have tried to do, at least, in a small way with all these tablets, that puts it in more of a historical context as well as their timeless context.
Marco has a couple of comments. He says, first of all, I didn't know that Pius IX supported the Italian nationalists, he was politically naive, and on several occasions he had words that were understood as support for the Italian nationalists. He also notes that Pius IX was very popular among the Romans, while the clergy were unpopular, and before his escape from Rome, many Romans would shout, Pio Nono solo, Pope Pius IX only.
Yes, that's in the early days. In latter days, in fact, after I'll be commenting on that once we finish the tablet. But when he passed away, he was so unpopular that when they first of all, they wouldn't let his body be buried in St. Peter's. I was actually in Vatican in 2019, in the summer of 2019, and I was actually looking for his tomb, and then I realized when I searched it that it's in one of the churches in Rome. It's not buried in in like many of the popes are in the keep, or in the what do they call it? The
crypt in the basement.
The crypt, yes, the crypt in the basement, which the last few popes have been buried. So he, in fact, I will tell you this, that as his body was being transported, there was a mob that threatened to capture the body and throw it in the Tiber, and this is how unpopular he was when he passed away, because again he had shown disdain and openly had denounced and excommunicated the Italian national heroes like Garibaldi, like the king, Victor Emmanuel. Many of them were excommunicated by the Pope. So the people, that generation that liked him, was in the 40s, now in the 70s, late 70s. So late 40s, he was popular. Late 70s, he was not popular at all. Yeah.
Interesting. Marco also had a few other interesting comments. He said regarding the delivery of the tablet, he refers to a passage in Bahá'u'lláh.com, and I found it while you were talking, where the Guardian in November of 1947 wrote a letter written on behalf of the Guardian to an individual believer, quote, "It seems likely Baha'u'llah's tablet to the Pope was never delivered to him. We do not know the method used to transmit it to him, and can only guess the church dignitaries would not have attached sufficient importance to it to deliver it. It would be wonderful if it were actually to be found in the Vatican archives. The original was written in Arabic. In 1868, Baha'u'lláh arrived in Akka, and the tablet was supposedly sent from there about that period. Unfortunately, this is the closest we can come at present to an accurate date."
Yeah, nothing really has changed, because there hasn't been any vigorous research done to try to figure out. First, we have to figure out whether it exists in the Vatican archives. Somebody has to go and figure that out. Okay, that's the first thing. Once you figure it out, there will be probably some provenance on how it was transmitted and how it was documented. So there is, but besides that, there's a lot of conjecture. Yes, and Baha'u'llah's reference, for example, it says that the letters to all the kings and rulers have been transmitted. It's in Nabil's narrative. So it's I really don't know beyond that there, again, we need to see whether there is any unpublished tablets of Baha'u'llah or any letters of Abdul Baha that actually shed more light on the circumstances of transmission of the tablet. We don't know at this stage. I think our knowledge is just the same as what it was when that letter of the Guardian was written.
Marco also says the tablet is obviously full of Christian terminology and biblical allusions. Has there been any study of the terminology and allusions of this tablet? Perhaps we should ask Marco to do it.
Yes, it would be great if Marco did it. I think there's been there's been some Shoghi Effendi in Promised Days Come makes commentaries on this, but it's mostly political, that how these impacted the geopolitical scene of Europe in the mid-19th century, and how its impact was felt decades later, leading to the First World War and so on. So as far as theology of it, no, I don't think there has been any particular studies of it. This is something that the students of this class can do as a project.
Giti asks what language the tablet was written in. We already covered that. It's in Arabic.
Yes.
Another anonymous attendee asks a very interesting question. How do we know the words of the tablet? Did the Baha'is keep a copy of the tablet in Akka?
Well, yes, these tablets, before they were sent, they were transcribed, and we have copies of this tablet in the handwriting of Zayn al-Muqarrabin, who was one of the famous Baha'i scribes and one of the apostles of Bahá'u'lláh. We have one that goes back to the early 1880s. We have, I've seen it. I actually have copies of it. Copy, not the original, but copy of it in the handwriting of Zayn al-Muqarrabin. It's in Kitab Mubin, the collection of tablets which has Surah Haykal as well as these letters. And they are probably in collections at the Baha'i World Center in the International Baha'i Archives of these. But such significant tablets would have been transcribed and multiple copies made before they would be transmitted. So, for example, Baha'u'lláh makes reference that copy of his letter to Napoleon III is in possession of the most great branch. So Abdul Baha actually had a copy of it. So Baha'u'lláh in one of his tablets refers to it that, yeah, there's a copy that is in the possession of the most, great branch. So yes, they would have been. These certainly would have been in collections or archivals. These letters to the kings were very significant, as you know. Baha'u'lláh also had it, as I have mentioned previously, had these included and calligraphied in the form of a temple, 5-sided star, in the early years of Akka, probably in the 1870s, he would have had that. So there would be there's definitely copies from going back to soon after its revelation. So we do have, yes, these were all preserved.
Yeah, Bahá'u'lláh clearly felt it was a very important tablet to
Absolutely.
first of all, to keep it and then to add it to the Haykal.
Yes.
William asks, did Baha'u'lláh send a letter to the U.S. president or Congress?
We'll talk about that. There was no direct letter. They're addressed in the pages of the Kitab Aqdas, but there's no specific letter that went to the President of the United States or Congress.
Another anonymous attendee notes that while we were talking about various tablets Baha'u'lláh had revealed to leaders, he notes that there were 4 tablets from the Bab to Muhammad Shah and a tablet of his to the Sultan Abdul Majid. Gary also asks an interesting question. Besides the instance in this tablet to the Pope, there are a number of other instances where the word rock with a capital R is used by Baha'u'lláh. Do these refer to Peter?
Yes, Bahá'u'lláh generally refers to Peter as as a title that was given. I think Jesus. It is said that Jesus says, "You are the rock on which I will build my church," and that's the whole premise of the how the Catholics have viewed and the primacy of the papacy and the Bishop of Rome, because the Pope is really just another bishop. He's a cardinal, but he's a Bishop of Rome. But because Rome was where Apostle Peter and Paul were martyred and are buried, it became the Holy See. It became the sacred place. So that's what the popes or the bishops of Rome have tried or at least succeeded in creating the primacy and their vicarship of Christ, because of the fact that these two significant apostles are buried in Rome. Yeah.
Of course, it's a title that Peter was given by Jesus, according to Matthew, Gospel of Matthew. And even Paul in his letters refers to Cephas, which is Aramaic for rock, Petros being the Greek translation. Anonymous also says, I have been working on a paragraph by paragraph study of the Surah Haikal, pointing out many of the biblical allusions. So that's good. Someone has been working on that one.
That's great.
And Elaine, here's the last one. Do we know the reaction of Pope Pius IX to this tablet when he received it? Of course, this is an old question, and by now we I think established we don't know whether he received it.
Yes. So I don't think there's been any reaction, because we don't know whether he actually received it or read it. I mean, there is a chance that it could have been, again, it could have been received by subsequent popes, or it could, but I doubt it. It's just, they had so much going on, that I think this letter from a prisoner out of, Ottoman Empire, coming in, and, it would have been, somebody would have read it and they would say, this is, God forbid, but it's nonsense. I mean, who is this guy, and they would have probably filtered it, I would think, and not got it to the Pope. But that doesn't mean just because he may have not received it that he's not responsible for it. It's God tests his creatures, and the leader amongst his creatures in a very strange way. But we're all subject to that test. So yeah.
And one last question here, and one last comment. What is your view of how the Surah Haikal holds together? That is, why would Baha'u'lláh add these 5 tablets to the kings, to the tablet in which Baha'u'lláh is mainly outlining his station as the temple of God? That's a really interesting question.
Well, it is interesting. And again, it's first of all, I believe recently our great learned scholar and professor emeritus, Dr. John Hatcher, has written a book that just has come up on the Surah Haikal, and these, I have not read it, but I would think that that symbolism and that significance he would have commented on it, at least from his point of view. My point of view is that Surah Haikal itself, if you read it, it's not only it's also a seminal proclamatory work that he addresses primarily to the people of Bayan, the Babis. And it also has mystical elements to it. It's a fascinating tablet, on its own. The Surah Haikal, the original one, which it acts as basically the exordium or the introduction, if you will, to this this other tablets too, because they all fit together, because it constitutes Baha'u'llah's proclamation. I mean, it's the most major work to the followers of the Bab and humanity, which, as correctly stated, he divulges his station in both direct and mystical way. and talks about, expatiates on his sufferings. It's a fascinating tablet, very lengthy tablet on its own. And then adding these letters. These letters, I've always maintained that next to, and I believe Shoghi Effendi makes a subtle reference to this in God Passes By, when he ranks all the works of Baha'u'lláh. He says basically the most important is his most holy book, the Kitab al-Aqdas, then the Kitab Iran, then the Hidden Words, and then he says the letters to the kings are the next, the significant, that sort of the rank fourth, if you will. And, you know, starting with Surah Muluk. The interesting thing is that Surah Muluk is not included in this Haykal. It's because it probably would have been just very, I don't know. It's a very, you know, simple suggestions I'm making, that Surah Muluk is 50 pages long. It's the most lengthiest of all the proclamations. It's longer than Surah Haykal on its own, longer than any of the letters to the popes, letters to the kings and rulers, including the Pope. And then, you know, so I would have thought that Surah Muluk on its own. So he couldn't have contained, I mean, physically there, not to say that it was not significant enough. I think Baha'u'lláh just felt, God felt that these fit the same theme, the major theme of his proclamation. So that's how I look at it. The rest is, you know, it's inscrutable to him, to all but him, as the old saying goes. So that's my 2 cents worth, you know, about that.
We'll scroot about it a little more in 2 weeks when we have the other half of this particular presentation. Thank you so much, Shahrokh. This has been absolutely fascinating.